Fighting games have plenty of long-running franchises, from Street Fighter to Tekken, Guilty Gear, Mortal Kombat, and etc. With so many games and entries, it's quite a common problem for newcomers to feel intimidated when they want to try to get into the genre, especially when they'll have to play against players that have years of experience and legacy knowledge with any of the games or the genre overall. I mean, fighting games aren't the easiest to fully grasp and learn, as each series has its own systems, mechanics, and playstyle, making the gameplay feel slightly different from one another. While some entries in any of these series aim to evolve or refine their predecessors, some also try to set themselves apart in their series. This then leads to the fact that naturally, reboots sometimes can be necessary for the genre to bring in new audiences and players to their games, and to reinvigorate their franchise. Now, reboots probably can be marked with like a new storyline or story arc, and new systems and mechanics to the gameplay. Because of this, it can help level the playing field for both old and newcomers with some updates to the older characters alongside introducing the new characters as well. It makes both player bases needing to learn the game out and be good at it. In fact, even veteran players sometimes can have a hard time adapting to the new games. It just happens. It also helps in making the series feel less stale for older fans as well. What got me thinking about reboots in fighting games in the first place is because of the new Virtua Fighter game that they unveiled at last year's Game Awards show. We still don't know yet whether it'll be called as Virtua Fighter 6 or just Virtua Fighter, but it's clear that the game is going to be a reboot, specifically a soft reboot. A sequel that provides the perfect entry point for new players to jump in without minding too much about the previous games. And hey, maybe it could encourage them to play the older games too. The game appears to be set many years after VF5, like in real life, with Akira now looking much older, and alongside him is a new younger character resembling Sarah. I wouldn't be surprised if we're going to see a lot of brand new characters in the game. We've also only seen a brief clip of the gameplay, and there's still a lot we don't know about how the final game will look and play like. So it'll be interesting to see how Sega will try to innovate the game for not only the series, but also for 3D fighters, since that is something that Virtua Fighter has always been known for. They'll also likely try to attract new players as well, whether by making the game more accessible or introducing a flashier, more appealing roster. That said, I hope they won't stray too far from the series' foundation in this game, like keeping the 3-button scheme, the rock-paper-scissors system of the movesets intact, and a focus on martial arts with a more grounded approach for combat, as this is something that I think is a bit underappreciated in the genre nowadays, but that might be just me. This is also the kind of reboot that you'd see a lot in fighting games, and I mean a lot, to the point that it might blur the definition of soft reboots. Because for the devs and players, it's also the starting point for a new beginning and a fresh start for the series without having or need to wipe away the already established lore, characters, and history of their respective series, while also trying to do something new with the game. A great recent example out of this that I think fits with the mold well and what made VF went with the direction that it did is Street Fighter 6. Now, Street Fighter as a series is no stranger to reboots. In fact, I think nearly every new generation of entries can be referred to as soft reboots, as they set themselves apart, reinventing the wheel while still fundamentally being Street Fighter. Like how the alpha games look and feel different to Street Fighter 2, with the anime-inspired look influenced by the animated movie, while also refining the gameplay with smoother movements and introducing new systems. Almost every Street Fighter game tries something new by introducing different new systems with its sequels. Street Fighter 4 was like a return to its root, for example, as it brought the series back after a long hiatus with a gameplay that focuses on executions. Street Fighter 5 felt more like a continuation to Street Fighter 4, except it felt more restrictive and less fun to play than SF4, as they went with a more casual-friendly direction. While Street Fighter 6 took a different approach, making a clear effort to distance itself a bit from Street Fighter 5, since SF5 does have a negative reputation, especially with its launch. The game launched having barely any content at all. It was bare bones as hell. And so the game didn't sell that well in its launch. And also, I think you can tell that I wasn't the biggest fan of Street Fighter 5. In many ways, Street Fighter 6 feels like what Street Fighter 5 should have been, especially in how it pushes the series forward. You can also say that the game is like a fresh start, a mini reboot of sorts to try to reinvigorate the franchise. And the game became a massive success for Capcom, and deservedly so, as they learned from their past mistakes and made a strong effort to get things right this time. Sure, it's not perfect, especially with its post-launch content and troll loops, god. But at its core, it's a great and fun game that successfully reinvented itself. The game is packed with tons of content at launch, like a huge single-player campaign. They also introduced the modern control scheme for newcomers, which honestly is annoying to fight against. Alongside that, there are plenty of new playable characters introduced while still bringing back the old classic characters as well, so that it still has that familiarity and connection to the older games. But honestly, the new characters weren't exactly the greatest. They were designed to leverage new players so that it won't be too intimidating for them, while also introducing something new to the older fans as well. But yeah, I don't think they're like that great aside from like 2 or 3 characters. I mean, who likes Lily? I still prefer T-Hawk myself. But that aside, the game is quite popular as it was able to balance out the intricacies of the gameplay to be welcoming to new players while not compromising on the complexity and depth of it. It led to an influx of new players, helping to revitalize the franchise in quite a big way, especially in Japan. The game is huge there. I mean, just look at the Twitch directory, most of the top Street Fighter 6 streamers are Japanese. I would say overall it's a good Street Fighter game. Now, if only they could roll out major updates and fresh content at a faster and more consistent rate, as the game does start to get a bit stale now. Perhaps a Super Street Fighter 6 update, Capcom? Please? With some solid gameplay additions and adjustments to it, just like what they did with Street Fighter 4 and 5, I think Street Fighter 6 could stack up as a really great Street Fighter game. While Street Fighter 6 is a great example of a series revamped done right, the same can't be fully said for Street Fighter 3 New Generation. And a huge reason for that is because of how drastically different the game looked and felt from what people expected Street Fighter to be like at the time. And luckily for Street Fighter 6, it benefits from a wider scope and definition of what Street Fighter can be, which is not something that Street Fighter 3 had when it came out. The thing is, Street Fighter 3 originally wasn't even planned to be a Street Fighter game, it was meant to be a new IP. So when it did become Street Fighter 3, it unintentionally became like a soft reboot for the series, which explains why almost the entire roster was filled with brand new characters, aside from Ryu and Ken returning, and why the game plays and feels so much different and weird. This kinda alienated many fans who had grown attached to the classic cast and gameplay feel. As a result, the game kinda struggled to find its footing, with many players opting to stick with Super Turbo or the alpha games instead. So Capcom had to course correct and salvage the game by making revisions. First was Second Impact, which improved on New Generation's gameplay alongside 3 additional characters, but it didn't really leave a strong impression still, and it wasn't until Third Strike that the game started gaining some recognition. Third Strike refined Second Impact's gameplay even further with some rebalancing to the roster as well, added more new characters including Chun-Li, and it also overhauled the overall presentation, especially the music. God, the music is so good in Third Strike. This then all led the competitive scene to flourish. Because of the gameplay refinement, players were able to discover many cool attacks as they were able to be showcased in many of the game's tournaments, and the game overall was just fun to play and to watch. But it did take years for that appreciation of the game to grow, and despite its eventual claim as one of the best games in the series though, the whole Street Fighter 3 sub-series just struggled commercially, as when the game did take off, it was already too late at that point, and it contributed to the franchise's decline and eventual hiatus. This then brings us to Reboots that didn't quite hit the mark, or it didn't go the way that the developers and publishers hoped that it could have been. Games like Mortal Kombat 1 and Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite are prime examples. Not because they were bad necessarily, but because of everything surrounding them that held them back from success. Take Mortal Kombat 1 for instance. It rebooted the series yet again after MK9, but in a way that felt convoluted as they made the reboot canon within the story, since MK11 wasn't the greatest amongst fans. The gameplay in MK1 itself is actually pretty solid. Plays better than MK11, though if you ask any Mortal Kombat fans, any game after MK9 will be polarizing for them. The real issue with MK1 was that it felt bare bones and unfinished at launch, with a noticeable lack of content compared to the previous games, as both the single player and online experience left a lot to be desired. That rough launch and poor first impression then hurt its competitive scene as well. You can see it in the low tournament attendance at EVO, where MK1 had fewer participants than its major contemporaries. Even Third Strike had more. But if we're talking about rough reboots, we have to talk about Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. MVCI was hella underwhelming. It failed to push the series forward or offer anything that was better or more interesting than the MVC3. The switch to a 2v2 system instead of the 3v3 that has been a staple since Marvel 2 felt like a downgrade to many fans. Sure, the game had a story mode, but it was alright and it's only about 2 to 3 hours long, nothing special. The whole game was clearly rushed though, with Capcom having little to no budget to work with. It's worth remembering though that this was pre-Monster Hunter World Capcom when they were still struggling financially. Street Fighter 5 had underperformed at launch and although Resident Evil 7 started turning things around, unfortunately this game was more of an afterthought as they put their priority elsewhere. Visually, MVCI looked very rough, partly due to Marvel's insistence on a more cinematic style to align with the MCU rather than the more stylized comic book aesthetics of MVC3. The music also wasn't as memorable and the roster was just a huge major letdown. Remember Function Fighters? With no X-Men characters due to again Marvel and Disney's restrictions and a lack of both brand new and returning characters from MVC2, it's no surprise the game collapsed under its own weight. Post-launch support was abysmal, and to make matters worse, Dragon Ball FighterZ launched shortly after, completely overshadowing it. Fighters, or Fighter Z, had more hype, better gameplay, and ultimately became the go-to tag fighter for the FGC. I swear, any game tied to the MCU seemed to be cursed. It killed the franchise for a few years, and I'm glad there was that collection that they released not that long ago. I mean, there's now a chance for a proper MVC4, right? Right? Though if you still want to try the game out, I highly suggest you to check out the MVCI Beyond mod by Maximilian Dude, which you can download it for free. So those are reboots that were a bit rough in terms of like revitalizing their franchise and creating excitement, as they kind of fell sideways. But then there are reboots that, despite their flaws, still managed to do pretty well, like Guilty Gear Strive, as it took a different approach to the idea of soft rebooting the series. While the franchise has had a long-running storyline, the game serves as the conclusion of that saga. I hope. I mean, you can't really trust fighting games with this. We all thought that Tekken 8 will be the end of the Mishima storyline, only to find out that the Mishimas simply cannot die. Where Strive really rebooted things though, aside from its name changing from the X naming scheme, was in its gameplay and overall design philosophy. Instead of this fast-paced over-the-top fighting game that you will normally associate Guilty Gear with, this game streamlined movement, attacks, and slowed down the pace significantly, and it made the game lean into a more grounded playstyle compared to the previous entries. Naturally, this shift drew in a wave of a lot of new players into the series, but it also left some series veterans feeling alienated. Visually, the game looks amazing as always with Arc System Works games, but it's just that the gameplay is pretty polarizing, especially for older fans. At the end of the day though, Strive became probably the best-selling game in the series, even if it did remain as a polarizing mainline entry in the franchise. Then there's Soul Calibur 6. In a way, it's kinda the opposite of Strive, where Strive was a huge success as it dramatically shifted its gameplay as a way to attract new players. Soul Calibur 6 was more about going back to its root, hoping that it will be the Street Fighter 4 for the series, reviving the franchise in a big way. But of course, it did not pan that way, which I'll get into in a bit. The game acts as a reboot by retelling the events of Soul Calibur 1, essentially undoing the damage that the state of the series is in after SC4 and 5. So they brought back fan-favorite characters and made the gameplay closer to the older titles. It was a clear attempt to win back longtime fans. At the same time, they tried to draw in new players by adding cinematic supers to the gameplay and guest characters like Gerald, 2B, and Haomaru. Oh, we can't forget about the character creation feature in the game now, can we? That shit was amazing! Seeing people taking it to the next level with what they can make. Now, I wanted to love this game, I really did, but the biggest reason it didn't last or attract more newcomers was its lack of rollback netcode. The online experience was just rough, making it a deal breaker for many players. The terrible netcode hurt the game's reputation and limited its longevity. Meanwhile, Tekken 7 became one of Bamco's best-selling games in the series, but Soul Calibur 6 never got to ride that same wave of success. And with that Harada's long tweet about the past and future of Soul Calibur, things aren't looking great. Though there's also that news with Bamco wanting to expand their licensing of their IPs for third parties, so Soul Calibur 7 could happen. Maybe. But I wouldn't bet on it. It's a shame really because Soul Calibur 6 played really well. It was just that terrible netcode and no crossplay that really held the game back. Which is understandable since games at the time generally aren't using rollback netcode yet. Though they could have at least retroactively added rollback to the game, but alas they just let it die. Though another series that had reboots as well is KOF. The KOF series has gone through multiple sagas and story arcs over the years, from the Orochi saga to Ness, Esh saga, and then the latest, the Verse saga. Each arc introduced a new protagonist with Kyo, K-Dash, Ash, and Shunei respectively. But you wouldn't really call the start of each saga as reboots now, would you? However, if we're talking about the biggest shakeups that revitalized the series, then we have to talk about KOF 12, which really is just a beta for KOF 13 and KOF 14. KOF 12, or I'm just gonna refer to it as KOF 13 instead, is one of the most beautifully made 2D fighting games ever. Even today, it's still highly regarded for its visuals and complex gameplay. But despite the amazing visuals, the game didn't do SNK any favors. You see, because of the amazing detailed sprite work in the game, it kinda made the game take longer and harder to develop for, and the cost of the development then didn't really help either. It makes it so that it's harder for SNK to recoup all of the costs. It was reviewed really well though, just wasn't the huge success that SNK had hoped for. Because of it, the series was put on ice for a few years as the company then found itself in a rough shape once again. It wasn't until KOF 14 that the franchise made a comeback, as this time they fully embraced 3D graphics instead of the traditional pixel art. Because of this, the game looked, well, rough, being SNK's first real attempt at 3D visuals for a mainline entry. Its visuals and art direction lacked the polish of other modern fighters, which is understandable since they probably have barely any budgets to work on this game. But hey, better to have that rather than no games at all, right? Fortunately, the game did pretty well, and in the long run, it will pave the way for SNK to keep the momentum going. KOF 15 looks significantly better and was a great game, we're getting a new Garou, and they also brought back Samsho a few years back. Speaking of Samsho, the latest Samurai Showdown is a soft reboot of the series, which is pretty obvious considering they didn't put a number in the title. But it's one of those reboots that revived the franchise after such a long hiatus, that a lot of modern fighting game players probably hadn't even heard of Samsho before this game dropped. Before that, the last proper Samsho game was Samurai Showdown San in 2008, and let's just say it wasn't exactly a high point for the series. But yeah, the latest Samsho is basically a return to form for the franchise, and also I would say a return to form for SNK as well, which is nice for them after all the rough patches that they went through. The game stays true to what makes Samsho great, a slow, methodical, and grounded playstyle with high damage combat and heavy focus on fundamentals and footsies. It's exactly what you'd want from a Samsho game, and I'm glad it got a lot of people to try the game out. Now, it kinda had a similar issue with Soul Calibur 6, where the game launched with no rollback netcode, which hurt its online scene early on. But SNK eventually patched rollback in, and it just improves the online experience a lot. Though the only thing still missing is crossplay with other platforms, though probably nobody plays this game online anymore. While we're talking about reboots that revived the franchise, we can't forget about Killer Instinct. If Samsho had been gone for a while, KI was practically a dinosaur in comparison. Before its 2013 revival, the series had been dead for nearly 2 decades. Ever since Microsoft bought Rare, most people assumed that we probably won't see anything new with KI after all those years went by, and a lot of flops by Rare. But out of nowhere, Microsoft announced a Killer Instinct reboot back in 2013 as an Xbox One exclusive early on. If only they hadn't fucked up that system's launch. That aside, the game itself was great. Essentially Killer Instinct but modernized with better graphics and all. Sure, it wasn't the most polished experience at launch, but the post-launch support was fantastic, with tons of updates. I'm looking at you, Capcom. They even updated it for the Xbox Series consoles. It was eventually ported to PC, but unfortunately the Steam version is a mess. Here's hoping a sequel is on the plans. Now, Melty Blood Type Lumina is a unique case of a reboot. It's basically, how do I say this? It's essentially a reboot because its source material is a remake of the original Melty Blood's source material. Yeah, it's not that complicated. Tsukihime got a remake, so they decided to make a new Melty Blood to go with it. Let's keep it simple as that. The original Melty Blood wasn't a heavy game at all, and it's pretty old, but it did get plenty of re-releases. You could run the game on just about anything. People played it on laptops, in parking lots, in bathrooms, and probably you can even play it on a smart fridge. Yeah, that sounds doable actually. There was even a tournament held in a park next to a vending machine. I mean, some people call Melty Blood a poverty game and you can't deny that. So when Melty Blood Type Lumina was announced, nobody saw it coming. Sure, some of us already knew that the Tsukihime remake had been in the works for years in Type Moon's dungeon, but no one expected a new Melty Blood to go with it and for it to drop so soon after the release of the Tsukihime remake. So when it finally came out, it was a very pleasant surprise. The game brought all the modern quality of life features that you'd want in a fighting game, especially rollback netcode. The game looks and feels great using the remake's character designs, revamped lore, and visuals as the foundation. But the real standout is the post-launch support. Free DLC characters and stages, that's practically unheard of in fighting games nowadays. If there's one downside, it's the auto combos, but honestly I don't care. The good far outweighs the bad here. I'm just glad that they brought Melty Blood back since Blaze Blue is dead and all. Thanks French Bread and Type Moon. Which brings me to reboots that were done right. Games that successfully breathed new life into their series, redefining what they could be and ultimately earning a place as some of the best in their franchise. I'm talking about Garou Mark of the Wolves and Tekken 3. Now, Garou Mark of the Wolves tried to revamp and re-envision the Fatal Fury series. I mean, it was also called as Fatal Fury Mark of the Wolves. The game is basically trying to do the thing that Street Fighter 3 did with introducing a new generation of characters as fighters. But where Street Fighter 3 struggled, Garou struck a much better balance between the new and the old. Now the entire roster is basically filled with brand new characters, but it didn't feel like a drastic departure from Fatal Fury. Instead, it came across as a natural evolution, because they did it by having the new characters having some ties to the older characters, creating a sense of continuity. Especially since the game takes place 10 years after the real bout Fatal Fury. Rock Howard, the new protagonist, is the son of Geese Howard, the villain of the original series. Other newcomers like both of Kim Kapuan's sons and Marco Rodriguez, an apprentice to Ryo Sakazaki, further connected Garou to its Fatal Fury roots and technically art of fighting as well, and so on. Terry Bogard also returned, now older and taking on a more supportive role for Rock. This approach helped the characters feel like a continuation rather than a total reset. Many even inherited moves from the older characters, reinforcing the idea of passing down a legacy. In terms of gameplay, the game refined to evolve while also streamlining the gameplay of the Fatal Fury games, but it also introduced the TOP system and the Just Defend mechanic to add that strategic layer in battle. It made the game as a whole still feel like Fatal Fury and will be regarded as one of the best games in the franchise, at least until City of the Wolves is being played a bit more and given the time to acclimate. But when it comes to soft reboots in fighting games, Tekken 3 easily takes the crown. Now within the series, I'd also say that Tekken 5 did a great job at salvaging and revitalizing the franchise, especially after Tekken 4, which despite having some parts that I love about it, was a mess both on release and during development. Tekken 5 then ultimately became the foundation and the base for how future Tekken games will evolve and build upon. But Tekken 3 as a soft reboot felt like a statement. It was both risky reinvention that ultimately paid off amazingly, like nobody expected that Tekken 3 would set up and be the start for a long-running storyline, let alone introducing a new generation of fighters for its lore and its playable roster. I mean, it did what Garou did first. With a significant time skip after Tekken 2, Tekken 3 introduced a fresh roster while maintaining ties to the past, as the game also introduced a brand new protagonist that would become possibly one of the most iconic characters from the genre, Jin Kazama. Jin was the perfect successor. As the son of Kazuya and Jun, he inherited some movesets of the two characters, combining the Mishima Karate and the Kazama-style martial arts, symbolizing his lineage in both gameplay and story. His design was also really cool. I mean, he wears trousers with flames on them. As a kid, that was the sickest thing ever. It's peak 90s cool. And honestly, that applies to the whole roster as well. Characters like Hwoarang, Xiaoyu, Eddie Gordo and all became instant fan favorites. This approach would later on be what Garou did with its characters too, where this game replaces the less popular older characters with the newer younger ones that were either related to them, being their disciples, or are just connected by lore. But they also brought back some of the iconic classic casts as well, as they became a staple of the series. We probably won't see Tekken being this bold again in introducing new characters for half of its roster. Gameplay-wise, Tekken 3 reworked Tekken 2's gameplay by fully embracing 3D movement with sidesteps, laying the foundation for movements in the series. It also introduced the iconic electric wind god fist, and the music too is so good, with a more underground tech, funk, and rock music for its tracks. Though I have to say it, the arcade music is better than the console music in this game. All around, Tekken 3 was phenomenal. It elevated the franchise to new heights as it became one of the most iconic fighting games of all time. Of course, it all was a calculated risk as they went all in trying to make a cool game, and it worked really well for them. Even if I would say that VF3 was way ahead of Tekken 3 for its time, but I guess you can say that Tekken 3 came out at the right place and the right time. So there you have it. These are like the major fighting game reboots that you can find. Reboots can be a gamble where you can find some of them fail to revive and reinvigorate their franchise in a big way, while others were able to find great success bringing in new fans and satisfying the older ones as well in some ways. It just goes to show how competitive yet niche the fighting game genre can be, especially as it moved away from the arcades. Might be one of the reasons why some developers stopped making more of them, and that might have contributed to the dark times when fighting games were in a downward spiral. But now, amidst some of the doom and gloom for the current fighting games, they are pretty much stronger than ever. Of course, with that, we hope it can create an opportunity for any developers to bring back any of the old dead fighting games. If they do, hopefully they know how to reboot them right. After all, reboots can breathe a new life into a series and can even take it to new heights. But on the opposite end, it can just easily send a franchise right back to the grave.